Welcome back, everyone, to another great episode of Insights from the Couch, Mental Health at Midlife. I'm so excited today. We have a fantastic guest for you, Melissa Petro, who has a new book out that is incredible, Shame on You, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification. Melissa is a journalist whose writing has been featured in the Washington Post, Allure, Cosmopolitan, Rolling Stone, Good Housekeeping, The Guardian, InStyle, and many other national publications. So impressive. And she was a finalist for the Penn Fusion Emerging Writers Prize. And she holds a Bachelor in Women's Studies from Antioch and an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the New School. She also lives with her husband and two young children in upstate New York, Westchester, I think, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm from Westchester, so I'm from Rye. So I love that detail. And Melissa is just a fantastic writer and has an incredible story to share today on how we as women can collectively and individually overcome shame. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you both so much for having me.
Yes, thanks for being here.
Laura and I both just read the book, and it sparked such discussion even between the two of us. And, we're both therapists. You had so much wisdom and so much valuable information. There were a couple of phrases I'd never heard before, so I want to dig into it all. But maybe first you could just tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. Initially, for decades, really, I had been working on writing a memoir because it was just so important for me to feel seen, heard, and understood after having felt so misunderstood in so many different ways throughout my lifetime. First, as a woman with experiences in the sex trade, sort of compartmentalizing that throughout the experience, and then afterwards trying to make sense of that identity. In 2010, I experienced mass media humiliation. After having transitioned out of sex work, I became a public school teacher, and then I was outed by the New York Post. So that experience of scandalization and humiliation ultimately, it just left me with this profound need to feel understood.
I bet.
Ultimately, this was a story about shame, and the shame that I internalized and that I had experienced being weaponized against me throughout my lifetime, not just as an individual with experiences in the sex trades, but as a woman.
Yes.
There was nothing unique about what I'd experienced. Not really.
I love that you really pull the lens back and bring in not just work in the sex trade, but just what it's like to be a woman. And you take it into the granularity of being a mom. I mean, I loved the part in the book when you're talking about women when they're breastfeeding and they feel like they feel so much shame around not being able to breastfeed and being such a vessel for other people, and that the body is being utilized for other people, and how much women feel so much vulnerability and shame. And I mean, I sit with those women. Mm-hmm. I have those clients. So I know what it's like when they come in and they feel shame around not being enough or not being able to execute as mothers or wives or sexual partners.
And it's really damned if you do, damned if you don't, because I have a lot of friends who are still breastfeeding 4-year-olds and they don't want to give it up, and they feel shame for that they connect to their child in that way, and that they're experiencing so much joy and pleasure from it. And that society just looks down at them for doing that too. We really can't get it right.
You said, my value in the world is linked to my desirability. And what woman hasn't felt that at some point? I really related to the parts in the book where you talked about that developmental stage of being a young woman and really feeling this weird sense of your body not being quite human, being objectified. And I was telling Laura before you got on that it really spoke to me because I developed very early, very early. I got my period at 11. I had full 34C boobs at 11. So I started developing breasts when I was 8 years old. And I remember sitting in the classroom. I went to an all-girls Catholic school in Greenwich, Connecticut. And I remember one of my little girlfriends saying oh, you're getting boobs. And then I ran out of the room and hid in the locker room crying for 3 hours because I was so mortified and I felt such shame. And then even being 12 years old and going to camp and male counselors who were teenagers calling my lips blowjob lips and kind of joking about it, thinking it was over my head. And I didn't really understand, but I knew that I was being sexualized in a way. And I felt that I should carry the shame for that, not them. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you really in the book make the argument so well that like women have a special relationship with shame, and it's part of this like misogynistic burden we've been saddled with.
Absolutely. You really described so painfully how a woman's body is under constant surveillance from girlhood. The moment we're really described as female, that burden is put upon us. I have a 4-year-old daughter. She already tends and befriends, which science, like research tells us, this is what women learn to do to keep themselves safe. We tend to other people's feelings. We befriend, we take care of. As a way of surviving, we don't fight the way a boy might. I mean, we do. but our inclination and what we get good at, pleasing others, becomes the quality that we can cultivate in order to survive.
It's like, be cute and be sweet, but don't be too sexy. Don't be a slut. Don't be a whore, but be desirable, right? Like women cannot win.
No. And I think once we start to recognize this, so to keep ourselves from feeling too like overcome by it. But once you start to recognize it, I think you can start to forgive yourself for some of the choices that we've made in our lifetimes and some of the things that have happened to us that weren't our choice. We start to recognize that this is a powerful influence and this is powerful conditioning that takes a lot to undo. And sometimes it doesn't, we're not even to the steps of undoing it yet. We're just to the steps of recognizing it, becoming aware of it, grieving what this means to not see oneself as fully human, trying to acquaint ourselves with the person we could have been if not for this objectified being. That's a lot of heavy work to do.
Yeah, and it's all happening as like an unconscious like subtext to our lives.
Right,
but it's
right.
there.
Right. It's kind of getting triggered when we burn the toast or when we show up a little too late at drop off and our hair is just a bit disheveled. It gets triggered throughout our life in all of these small, seemingly minor ways, but it's actually connecting to something very deep and profound. And that's really what the book tried to do. It was trying to find the way shame, I talk to women about the big shames in their lives, the real deep, dark secrets they're holding on to. And I had those, to be sure. But it was also when I became a mom, I discovered it was all these tiny, seemingly insignificant ways I wasn't living up to an unspoken expectation and feeling less than as a result. That was really, really keeping me from achieving my goals and knowing my worth. And these are, whether you've got that big, deep, dark secret or whether, you're just feeling less than because you can't get on top of the laundry, it's going to weigh you down. It's going to weigh you down. It's going to affect your physical and mental health. And if we don't get on top of that, the shame, it's ultimately going to kill us, either physically or metaphorically. We are not going to be the women we were put here to be if we can't make peace with this power that's being imposed upon us constantly.
Can I just go back though, like to this moment where you talk about we're being watched, where we know we have to perform for this like male gaze. That's typically what it is, right?
Right.
And then there's that moment in our development, and Colette and I were talking about it, where she realized that those blowjob lips and those boobs could be leveraged for power.
Right. It could be a source of power. Even as you're told not to, never take advantage of this.
Right.
We realize that we really can.
Yeah, by high school, I was like, wanted to be known as like, well, I was proudly, or at least I thought I was known as like the one who gave the best blowjobs. Like I took that shameful identity and flipped it. And for a while, really like owned it and was like always showing my boobs and excited that boys liked me because of my boobs and my lips. And then, of course, that had a weird, complicated shame component that I suppressed.
I talked about this in the book. I discovered in grad school this really obscure study of Belarusian women who they were shuttle workers, and they would go to cross state lines and buy cheap stuff. Same thing that I do on Facebook Marketplace, and they flip it. You know, you buy something, or you find it in the trash, and then you sell it for a markup. It's actually very low paid, low prestige work, but they would turn it into these pride identities. And when I found that study, I just connected so deeply to it, because I recognized that I took a lot of pride, like a lot of pride in my identity as a sex worker. And it was ultimately an overcompensation, right? I just sort of like owned it, like really doubled down for a period of my life. And in other ways too, these undesirable identities like slut, like we just double down and like, okay, well, if that's what I'm going to be, like, I'm going to be it. I'm an attention
lean
whore
into
for sure.
it. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's not true either. These are just flat names that are just like put upon women that really just obfuscate the nuance of our human experiences and our lives.
The whole idea of sex work, like, and our sexuality, we're so ashamed of it, especially when we just, trip over it when we're young and people are bringing it to our attentions. But we've at some point realized we can leverage it, but like it's another double bind, because if we leverage it, then shame on us again. So I find that that's a real, like most places women go, it's a real like narrow needle to thread of using your sexual power, enjoying your sexual power, or being shamed by it.
And I actually discovered when I became a mother that there were similar reductive narratives around mothering. There were these empowered stay-at-home moms who just loved being the traditional housewife. And then there were these working mothers who just, and I was in this in-between world that a lot of us are in, and, with part-time flexible work, but also I was mostly staying home doing the unpaid childcare. And none of these narratives really fit my experience. They were just these reductive that people had really doubled down on, that they were really, like loud and proud, whatever they were. Just like sex work, there are these empowered sex workers, and then there were these people who felt entirely victimized by it, and I was neither of those either. So these narratives, one, they really pin women against women, right?
Yes.
Because now we're having the mommy wars, rather than looking at the nuance in our lives and really exploring, where is the pleasure, where is the autonomy, where's the freedom and choice, and where is the constraint? And how do we individually and systemically overcome those constraints? Instead of doing that, we're arguing about whether it's empowering or not to be a stay-at-home mom.
Right. And women are judging each other, which is part of this whole thing. We shame each other. I mean, I know I am divorced and remarried. I got divorced when my kids were young. And the amount of judgment that was levied on me, I had to build a career out of nothing. My ex-husband had a new woman moved into his house before we were even divorced, 2 months after we separated, and he quickly married her. His life didn't skip a beat. He had a lucrative career. I had to create a career out of nothing. And yet I was constantly judged for if I went out too much at night with friends to blow off steam. Oh, Colette's smoking cigarettes. Colette's drinking. Colette's having fun. Colette's at work all the time. Colette's not working enough. I mean, there was not one fucking thing I could get right in this small little judgmental community. And part of it is that I was wearing the scarlet letter of divorce, that I had chosen a divorce for very good reasons that I did not share publicly for my children's benefit and to be a decent human to my ex-husband. But the fact that I had the balls to choose to divorce someone when I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and then go out and not look upset about it, that alone was not something I was allowed to do as a wife and mother. And I really struggled. It took years for people to even give me an ounce of a break. Where my ex-husband's stuff, nobody said boo.
Right. We have a lot of language to describe women and our undesirable identities that we just don't have for men. The divorcee is not a word we really put upon a man. And we really came up in a feminist culture that told us, that we ought not feel ashamed. A very like girl power, shameless, fuck you kind of culture. And if you felt ashamed, that was maybe indicative of some sort of like ignorance or weakness. You weren't entirely feminist if you fell for it. I just really just pretended I wasn't ashamed, or I didn't feel the experience in my body.
That's so interesting because I didn't come up in a world where anybody said I shouldn't feel shame. I mean, I found feminism, and I actually am a women's studies minor, psychology major, women's studies minor. And to this day, and even as I was reading your book, I was realizing how much of my own internalized sexism was coming up. I see it in my own like parents, my own mother, when she's like, well, like, I don't know, I don't really enjoy watching women's basketball. It's just not really, she just doesn't like women's sports. Or I don't like that female candidate. She's just not enough of this or enough of that. And to Colette's point, like, we women police one another with our own sense of like, well, you shouldn't have done that. Or that was really, or what you say in your book, you said, don't be too slutty, stupid, or fat.
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, I'm still trying to eradicate parts of myself that believe that.
Yep. That's it, right? And that came up when we watched Monica Lewinsky get humiliated. We learned
It's like,
that
oh, you
there was
dumb
nothing
girl.
worse than what she was, which was slutty, stupid, and fat. We're talking about a 20-something-year-old girl.
I know.
Who was a victim of an abuse of power.
predation.
100%
If not-
victim.
right,
But didn't
predation.
we hear our mothers?
And no
didn't-
one treated her like a victim. Bill
Not at all.
Clinton was treated like the victim.
Absolutely. And that still replays itself again and again in our media landscape today. She should have known better. And that's what gets internalized in our own head. We should have known better.
Melissa, as you're saying this, I feel my blood like boiling for her because it just was
Same.
such a travesty. Can you talk a little bit about how you weathered the mass media shaming? I mean, that had to be one of the most traumatic. Maybe it wasn't traumatic for you, but it had to be awful.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It was so surreal. And by then I had developed a certain amount of shame resilience and critical thinking and just the survival instinct of intellectualizing things. I was a media maker at that time also, so I was interested in how narratives were produced. And so I was able to disassociate essentially and
Right.
watch it happen in a way. Intellectually, I knew it was wrong, and yet still it felt something very interesting happens. And as I studied mass media humiliation, I learned that this is the experience. Either we internalize something or externalize it, right? So either they were right and what I did was wrong, or the world is wrong. Like the whole world is wrong. I can't
Wow.
even believe that to be true. But here it was
Right.
telling me that I was an idiot. Even people who agreed with me, who on a certain level, who politically understood my point, they felt I was stupid for having made it. That disconnection from the world is so isolating, and it really leaves you feeling so profoundly alone, unless you can find people who get you. Right?
Did you have that? Did you have those people around you?
I totally did. So I
Okay,
was at the
good.
time I was in early recovery. I was about 4 years sober in a program of recovery. So I could go to and I did this with the paparazzi chasing me, with journalists and photographers and media chasing me. I'd run to a meeting, and just to sit somewhere where I knew no one was judging me. And 12-step recovery was absolutely a part of my recovery from shame, and part of shame resilience for me was finding a safe container, and that's what it was for me, a place where I could just be and share. No one was going to judge me. I wasn't going to be given advice. No one was going to I couldn't be harmed for the truth of my experience. People were just going to respond appropriately. It could be a writing workshop. It could be church if that's your thing. It could be group therapy, or I did 12-step recovery, lots of them.
Can you explain a little bit of the narrative of what happened? Like how you'd written an article and then what
right.
happened with the post? Because I think that's something that people would really be so interested in, and they may not yet know that piece of the story.
So I went to the New School for creative nonfiction, and I was working on a memoir at that time. I really was trying to make sense of myself and my experience. They tell you if you want to get an agent and publish a book, you have to start publishing little short pieces. So one of my very first bylines was on the Huffington Post. I had written an op-ed in defense of the rights and dignity of individuals with experiences in the sex trades. It was right after Craigslist had kind of shut down its adult services section. I think they gave it a different name or something. That basically they were under a lot of heat that it was promoting sex trafficking and underage prostitution and exploitation. It was like 900 to 700 word op-ed using my own experience just to say that people have sex for all sorts of reasons. For some of us, one reason is money. This was a place that people do it. We're not all under the control of a pimp. And in fact, it's very easy to get in and out of the work through something like a Craigslist at the time. So, it was a pretty benign op-ed, didn't get very much attention. But in it, I had said something like, I'm risking my current social standing and profession to make this argument because it's just that important. It should be made. And people can't really do that. And that's one reason why decisions get made without the input of individuals with experiences in sex trades. They can't step up and speak up for themselves. So I did that. 2-3 weeks later, I was basically ambushed by a reporter with a photographer from the New York Post at the steps of the school where I taught. I was a public school teacher. I taught art in the South Bronx to kindergartners through grade 5, which is what I had started doing. After I transitioned out of sex work, I became a New York City teaching fellow when I got sober. And, I had really reconnected to my goals and to the person that I wanted to be prior to having becoming a sex worker. I was 3 years into teaching, and it was taken from me overnight. I never returned to the classroom after that article ran. They ran that headline, Bronx teacher admits I'm an ex-hooker, and then headline after headline. They were relentless for about 3, 4, 5 months. I sat in what's called reassignment, which is where they put teachers who can't be fired because they're union until they can. And I just sat there waiting for them to either fire me or to resign, which I ultimately did. It was nonstop. I was a caricature. I was intentionally humiliated to make certain political points for the New York Post. They hate teachers' unions and slutty women are slutty and all the messages they want to say. I was the perfect poster child for all the points that they intended to make.
Were you blindsided by this, or did you know that when you wrote this, it was a real possibility?
Who thinks that, it was kind of before the idea of viral essays. It wasn't, I was still a little naive. Now I think that being the main character, we're all kind of walking on eggshells all the time because we know, at any moment we could be the person that everyone is making fun of. It happened a lot less then. It was such a big deal that I was on CNN.
Holy shit, Melissa.
We don't, it happens so often now that we don't even make that big a deal about it. Someone is just humiliated for a day and then we move on to the next person to humiliate. That's our culture of shame.
We have a horrible culture.
We really do. And it's built on the foundation of this, that we would really choose a character and develop the story and then just mercilessly pile on until that person was gone. So no, I did not expect that this would happen. I didn't, every writer would love to be read and for it to go viral. I would never in a million years have thought that so many people would be interested in what I have to say. But actually no one was interested in what I had to say. Even people who supported me hadn't read the piece. That's what happens when someone gets quote unquote canceled or becomes the target. If you're in the spotlight of shame, it's not your story. And that can become really devastating when you experience it because it's very easy then to even forget your own story.
How long did it take you to sort of piece your life back together after a moment like that?
Even when I was at my most confused, I didn't abandon myself. That's how I'll say it. I never abandoned myself, not through that full situation. Do you know who I listen to now that I can really see is Stormy Daniels?
Wow.
When she talks about her experience, she is so articulate about the nuance Because it's so hard to say in our culture that you are both a victim and that you have power.
Yes.
To be able to really describe one's victimization and the way that you're being unfairly harmed, but to still have dignity in that, and to know that you're making choices, it's so hard because we don't have very much like models of that, right? Women are either victims or they're villains. And I really tried to know the truth of my experience throughout that ordeal, that I was neither entirely a victim nor was I the villain that the New York Post was painting me out to be. I was a human being.
You gave me goosebumps, right? You're a human being, not a victim or a villain, right? It's so much more complicated than that. And I love hearing that at that point you had developed the shame resilience where you didn't just crawl away in a corner in shame like the New York Post would have had you do, because that was their only objective, was to shame you for media attention.
And that's what shame wants us. They just want to shut you up and shut you down.
Shame is isolation. Shame wants you to hide. Shame wants you to feel inadequate and unworthy. And this is part of why this is, I think, a great segue into how we can overcome shame. And I love how you talk about shame resilience. So you had to go through this in many iterations in many ways, right? And so what did you learn that you share so beautifully in the book about how we can work with shame? Because we're not going to be able to get rid of it. It is part of the human experience.
Right.
But what do we need to know about moving through and with shame in life as women?
Right. And it's really tricky. And sometimes this slips into my communications, my publicity about the book, and, to fight shame, or we're at war with shame. And I don't want to believe that, because if we're at war with shame, you're at war with yourself. This is a part of ourself, and it's a very human part. Like any other emotion, you're going to feel shame. And then we have to nurture ourselves. Okay, I see you.
Yeah.
I see that feeling. I see that feeling. I see where it's coming from. I know myself, and I know this world. And I'm going to act now from a more intelligent place, rather than the primitive out of fear to escape the pain of shame. I'm going to connect more to my higher brain.
Right, your wise self.
And move from that. So whenever I find myself in the feeling pain, just start there. I do that practice. All right. And I don't always do this. Let's not fucking lie. Right.
Yeah.
When you remember, you do it.
But let's just say 1 out of 10 times. Like, oh, I'm in pain. Let's figure out why. Okay, and then I share it. That one I do find someone.
Yes.
I've got them everywhere. People that they'll be like, "How you doing?" I'll be like, "I have a hemorrhoid." We have that. These are people, good people.
Totally.
I find people who I can say that to, and they're not going to act like I farted in the room. They're going to return just the way I described those safe containers. I've got safe containers all over the world. I can walk into the coffee shop. I know that barista. I could that the mom at drop off. She and I have a thing. I have my people. My shame resilient folks, I found them. I've cultivated these people where I can just be like, this is what's going on in my day.
Yes.
And I can just unload. And they are there to hear it, to hold it, to return, maybe with their own story, or just empathy, nonverbal. And that's how we move. That's shame resilience. So every time you unload, it's a little bit less.
I love that.
It's the opposite of what shame signals our body to hide and retreat and isolate. And what melts the shame is allowing yourself to be seen in it, and to have those people who have empathy and are also willing to be vulnerable and cop to being human. There's nothing better. I mean, this is a big part of what Laura and I as friends, we're both therapists and we are colleagues, but we are really good friends, and we will go to dinner and have a 3-hour dinner where we just share these really human things of feelings that are shameful to admit to, or that, you might not publicly disclose. And we're always so willing to just validate one another and have empathy. And it's so, I always leave my time with you, Laura, feeling so much lighter for exactly what you're describing, Melissa.
And you really
Same.
become a stronger person the more shame resilient you are, because it stops us, it holds us back. That thing that no one can know is really burdensome.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's so heavy.
It's awful. And I just had this. I just had my birthday, and I spent a lot of time, when we talked about like you can't be too slutty, too stupid, or too fat, in a very long-term relationship with someone who fat shamed me pretty explicitly, even at times that I was arguably underweight. And I really internalized it, even as I fought it intellectually. And I tortured my own self because of the collective societal messages. And then in this relationship, I was so desperate to be loved and desired and good enough. And it really did a fucking number on me for a long
Right.
time. And I'm still working through it.
The energy and like think of what we
Yes.
could be doing instead. Think
Yes.
of the creative energy, the time, the
Yep.
resources that
I
we
put
spend.
all of it into trying to be thin. However, on my birthday this year, I made a point of creating a post, because I have to be on social media all the time, where I showed myself in a bathing suit, 30 pounds
love that
overweight. Yeah. And I wrote all the things that have changed and about how life is getting better in this chapter in my 50s, and like loving my flawed human body as it is. And for me to put a picture, a video of myself, I'm not going to lie and say, because so many people were like, oh, I'm so glad you posted that. But I'm not going to lie and say that when I posted it, there wasn't still that voice going, oh my God, like my fat rolls and like the cellulite on my thigh is visible, and thinking about people seeing it and feeling some embarrassment and even shame. Even at the same time, that part of me felt like, yes, this is what I look like. And I'm proud that my body is like alive and supporting me. It's still a complicated walk to walk with shame.
That's pointing towards, it's not about you. It's about how shame functions in our society as a way of weaponized suppression against anything that can be any difference, any othered. It's used against women and minorities in particular to keep people in line and conforming to a certain white supremacist heteronormative status quo.
Exactly.
Shame resilience is not this like white woman self-care type act, but it really is a political, a fiercely intersectional act that once we're really practicing shame resilience within our own experience, our own individual and interpersonal lives, then we can start to act politically also and really start to see people as human and start to love each other as we deserve to be loved and respected.
Judgment is really such a projection
Absolutely.
of how we see ourselves, what we're afraid of, what we don't want to be, the internalized self-loathing that we have that we then turn outward. And I see this, I'm a couples therapist. So much of, obviously, relationships are complicated, but anytime I have a client who was spoken to very critically and had harsh judgmental parents, either explicitly or implicitly, they have a very hard time being soft and open and loving to their partner, because that is how they judge themselves.
Oh, I'm hiding my face because if my husband were here, he'd be giving me a knowing look.
Towards you?
Absolutely. I still have that voice, and we still do shift shame, and there's a lot of defensiveness and blame in our relationship. There's also respect, and we're good at repairing. Gottman. But we have those challenges. I'm really grateful for being embraced by marginalized communities. After I lost my job and had nowhere to go, nothing to do, I was unemployed and unemployable, I started working with harm reduction communities. I worked at needle exchanges, people whose stories was not my story. Maybe some people had experiences in the sex trades, but that wasn't like the thing that marginalized them. And they just accepted me and embraced me in spite of the whole world rejected me. Well, here were people who accepted me, who could empathize. And empathy is the anecdote. If we can start to see other people and recognize their humanity in spite of their shame, then we can start to recognize our own humanity.
Yeah.
So we start to soften to that imperfection, that imperfect self.
Yes, which we all are.
Which is why, like, what Colette's talking about, our relationship and being able to have that safe space. And safe spaces are the places where we heal. And the fact that you have so many of those, like you have the person at drop off and you have the person here and there, and you cultivate that. The more we can cultivate that in our world, the empathy, the safeness, the vulnerability.
And be that person for someone.
And be that person.
It's a bit of a risk to reach out, but to reach out to someone who, or to stand up for someone. So often we're just the bystander of so much violence. We watch someone else being tarred and feathered for a mistake, and we say nothing. Maybe we even kind of enjoy it because it's not us that time.
Right.
What if we stood up for that person? This is something else I heard Stormy Daniels talking about, how, she gets a lot of hate mail, but she doesn't get that many messages of support, not as many as she should, right? So like really reaching out to the person who does not have someone at drop off to kind of turn to. If you see someone who looks like they might be suffering in a prison of their own perceived inadequacies, why not let that person know they're not alone?
I totally agree. And it never even occurred to me to reach out to someone who's in the media spotlight, but I'm going to, because you don't know if that person has no one.
I think we think if someone's on TV, we think they're highly resourced and someone's getting paid. Let me tell you, I did not. I still don't get paid. You know what? I'm still surviving. We're all just doing our best.
It's really all we want at the end of the day as human beings is to feel safe and accepted.
And it has an effect on you too. So when you reach out and say, hey, I see you and you are a brave bitch, you're hearing that too. That's unlearning something that has been harming you since forever. And that's relearning how we speak to each other and how we speak to ourselves.
Oh my God, Melissa, this is so incredible.
Yeah.
I just want to sit and talk to you for 24 hours and share our little stories and melt shame in a little safe container. It just feels so good inside to have these conversations and be able to be open and honest as women and admit to and acknowledge things that we all have struggled with, both in our own minds, just being people in society. And hopefully we're segueing into a new era where we do start to shift the way we handle shame.
I think we are.
And as women, that we reject these identities, that we can be slutty and stupid and fat and change those terms, right, into something that's just about being flawed, beautiful people.
Yeah, that's just benign. And I think we're doing that. When Kamala Harris started to be attacked because she's child-free,
for everything.
Yeah, for all the things, we all just sort of laughed in that knowing way.
Yeah.
It didn't upset us in the same way. And that's because we're developing a certain cultural competence when it comes to shame and how it's been weaponized against women. And we're going to turn that into a superpower.
And I'm going to write Monica Lewinsky a note because I have thought so many times I have regretted how I responded to that story back in the day and how I judged her. And I'm the same age she is. And I follow her on social media. So you have inspired me to write a note to her.
Well, we got to write to Anita Hill at the same
There's
time.
a long list of women, right?
Yes.
There's a long list of women that we really watched burn.
And that we may have participated in persecuting as women, that we could really shift into something so much softer, so much more empathetic. And that's going to change the way we judge ourselves, not just the way we judge others. So powerful. So I want to say again, Melissa's fabulous book that Laura and I just read that you should all go out and buy today, Shame on You, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification. And Melissa, you had a fabulous article in Time magazine as well that just came out. So we'll link to those in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you both.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.